If you drive north on Route 7A through Vermont in mid-September, the world looks like it's on fire. The maples are turning that violent shade of red, the air smells like wood smoke and drying hay, and the tourists are everywhere. They come for the quaintness. They come for the white steeples and the marble sidewalks of Manchester. They come to forget that the real world exists. But in 1986, the real world didn't just find Manchester. It tore it open. It starts with the corn. Corn in Vermont isn't like corn in Iowa. It's planted in smaller, choppier fields, wedged between ancient stone walls and rolling green mountains. It's dense. It's isolating. And in the fall of 1986, the cornfield belonging to the Wilcox dairy farm was high enough to hide a tractor. It was the morning of September 19th, a Friday. The frost was still clinging to the shadows when Earl Wilcox, a man who had farmed that land since the Truman administration, stepped out to check a drainage ditch. Earl wasn't the type to be easily rattled. He'd seen blizzards bury his herd, he'd seen floods wash away his roads. But what he saw that morning, 90 feet from the edge of the pavement, made him drop his coffee thermos. At first, he thought it was a mannequin. That's what everyone says, isn't it? It's the brain's way of rejecting the horror. She was lying on her back between the rows. The dirt was damp. The stalks towered over her, creating a cathedral of shadows. She was dressed for a summer day that was already gone. A pristine white golf skirt, a Manchester Country Club polo shirt. And she was posed. This wasn't a body dumped in panic. This was an arrangement. Her legs were straight, ankles together. Her arms were folded across her chest. And on her left hand, she wore a white leather golf glove. Earl didn't touch her. He didn't need to check for a pulse. The purple bruising that ringed her neck, contrasting sharply with the white collar of her shirt, told him everything he needed to know. He walked back to his farmhouse, dialed the operator, and said 4 words that would change the town forever. There's a girl in the corn. Welcome to the longest round. I'm your host. Today, we are looking at the case of Sarah Hunter. If you lived in New England in the 80s, you knew the name. She was the golf girl. The beauty in the cornfield. For 37 years, her killer walked among us. He might have stood behind you in line at the grocery store. He might have sat next to you at a parent-teacher conference. Because the thing about Sarah Hunter's murder is that it wasn't committed by a drifter passing through. It was done by someone who knew exactly who she was. And for nearly 4 decades, he kept a secret that was buried just as deep as she was meant to be. To understand the death of Sarah Hunter, you must understand the life she lived and the precarious ledge she stood on. Manchester, Vermont, in 1986, was a town of 2 faces. On one side, you had the locals, the farmers, the mechanics, the people who plowed the snow and served the food. On the other side, you had the Hill, the Equinox Resort, the Manchester Country Club. Old money from New York and Connecticut that flowed up Route 7 every summer like a golden tide. Sarah Hunter was the rare person who could walk between those 2 worlds, but she didn't fully belong to either of them. At 36 years old, Sarah was the head female golf pro at the Manchester Country Club. In 1986, that was a heavy title. Golf was still a boys' club. A woman on the green was expected to be decorative, polite, and not too good. Sarah was too good. She was born in California, a blonde, athletic transplant with a swing that looked like liquid mechanics. She had moved to Vermont 3 years prior, looking for a fresh start after a messy divorce back west. Her friends described her as magnetic. She had this laugh, her former roommate, Jessica, told police in an old cassette recording we've uncovered. It was loud. Not a polite society laugh. A real belly laugh. She liked white wine. She drove a red Mazda RX-7 that she drove too fast, and she didn't take crap from the wealthy men she gave lessons to. But being the golf pro was a lonely pedestal. To the wealthy members, she was the help, albeit glamorous help. They invited her to drinks, they flirted with her, they tipped her heavily, but she wasn't one of them. To the locals, she was the flashy blonde in the sports car who worked for the rich folks. By September 1986, cracks were forming in Sarah's perfectly manicured life. Diaries found in her apartment painted a picture of a restless woman. She wrote about feeling watched. She wrote about a suffocating attention from the men at the club. And she wrote about leaving. In fact, Sarah had a secret. She had applied for a position at a prestigious club in Jupiter, Florida. She had the job offer. She was going to give her notice on Monday, September 22nd. She was 3 days away from escaping Manchester. She never made it to Monday. Let's zoom in on the victimology here, because it's crucial to the psychological profile of the killer. Sarah was independent. She lived alone in a rented carriage house near the course. She was known to go for evening drives to clear her head. She wasn't fearful. She was a woman who was used to handling herself in a male-dominated industry. This confidence, tragically, might have been what the killer exploited. There was no sign of forced entry at her home. There was no sign of a struggle in her car. Whoever met her that night, she likely stopped for them. She likely rolled down her window. She might have even smiled at them. So, who was it? Was it the jealous ex-lover who couldn't handle her success? Was it the wealthy club member who thought his membership dues included ownership of the staff? Or was it someone invisible? Someone looking from the outside in? To find the answer, we must go back to the last day she was seen alive. Thursday, September 18, 1986. A day that started with sunshine and ended in the dark rows of a cornfield. Thursday, September 18, 1986. The day began like any other in the life of a club pro. The logbook at the Manchester Country Club shows Sarah Hunter clocked in at 7:30 a.m. She gave 3 lessons that morning, one to a teenager struggling with his slice, one to a retired judge, and one to a woman named Brenda, a summer resident who would later tell police that Sarah seemed distracted. She kept checking her watch, Brenda said in her statement. Usually, Sarah was laser-focused. But that day, she was looking toward the parking lot. Like she was waiting for someone. Or maybe avoiding someone. At noon, Sarah ate lunch at the clubhouse grill, a turkey club sandwich and an iced tea. She sat with the assistant pro, a guy named Mark. Mark remembers asking her if she was going to the end-of-season mixer that weekend. Sarah reportedly laughed and said, "I might be busy." It was a throwaway comment at the time. Later, it would be dissected 1,000 times by detectives. Busy doing what? Busy with whom? The afternoon was quiet. The shadows started to stretch long across the fairways. At 5 p.m., the pro shop slowed down. At 6:15 p.m., Sarah locked the register. At 6:30 p.m., the last verified sighting of Sarah Hunter occurred. A groundskeeper named Pete saw her walking to her red Mazda RX-7. She was wearing her work clothes, that white skirt and polo. She had her golf bag slung over her shoulder. Pete waved. Sarah waved back. She got into her car and drove out of the main gate, turning left onto Route 7A. She was supposed to meet a friend for a drink at the Equinox at 7:30. She never showed up. By 9 p.m., her friend called her landline. No answer. By the next morning, when Sarah didn't open the pro shop, panic set in. Sarah Hunter was never late. She was precision personified. Let's go back to the cornfield. Friday morning. Earl Wilcox has called the police. The first officer on the scene is a young deputy named Jim Morrison. He's 24, barely older than the victim. He's handled DUIs and domestic disputes. He has never seen a murder. He secures the scene, but in 1986, crime scene integrity wasn't what it is today. There were footprints. Farmer Earl's boots. The deputy's boots. But despite the contamination, the scene told a story. Sarah's body was located 97 feet from the road. Why 97 feet? That's a long way to carry a body. And that's the first clue. There were no drag marks. The dirt between the corn rows was relatively undisturbed. This implies 2 possibilities. 1, the killer forced her to walk there at gunpoint or knife point. 2, she walked there willingly with someone she trusted, perhaps to talk, perhaps for privacy, before things went wrong. Or 3, the killer was incredibly strong enough to carry a 130-pound woman over uneven ground without dragging her heels. The forensic team arrived from the state capital, Montpelier, around noon. They began to process the body. This is where the details get difficult, but we must look at them. They are the voice of the victim now. Sarah had been strangled. The medical examiner would later determine the cause of death as asphyxia due to ligature strangulation. But the ligature wasn't a rope. It wasn't a wire. Based on the width of the bruising and the abrasion patterns, the weapon was soft but strong. The leading theory? A golf towel. Or perhaps the sleeve of a sweater. Something handy. Something that belonged in her world. And then there were the oddities. The signatures. We mentioned the posing, the crossed arms, the straightened legs. But there was more. Her shoes, white FootJoy golf cleats, had been removed. They were placed neatly next to her head, aligned perfectly, left shoe on the left, right on the right. This suggests remorse. It suggests a need to tidy up. A stranger who kills in a rage usually leaves a chaotic scene. They run. This killer stayed. He took the time to take off her shoes. But was it a gesture of respect? Or was it a fetish? And the most chilling detail of all, the golf glove on her left hand. Sarah was right-handed. She wore a glove on her left hand to play. But she had left work. She was driving. No one drives wearing a golf glove. This means the glove was put on after she left the shop. Did she put it on? Or did the killer put it on her? If the killer put it on her, that turns this from a murder into a dark, theatrical performance. While the body was being processed, another call came in over the radio. A hiker had found a red sports car. 3 miles away, tucked into the trailhead parking lot of the lonesome Equinox Pond Trail, sat the Mazda RX-7. The doors were unlocked. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her keys were in the ignition, turned to the off position. The radio was set to a classic rock station. But here is the detail that kept detectives awake at night. The driver's seat. Sarah was 5 feet 5 inches. She drove with the seat pulled forward. When police found the car, the seat was pushed all the way back. The person who drove that car last had long legs. This confirmed that Sarah didn't drive herself to that spot. The killer did. He killed her, or subdued her, drove her car to the trail to dump it, and then walked away? Got into another car? The car was a goldmine of fingerprints. But in 1986, without a digital database, fingerprints were only useful if you already had a suspect to compare them to. They lifted partials from the steering wheel, the gear shift, and the rearview mirror. They bagged fibers from the seat. They found a receipt for gas, a wrapper for gum, and a single, long, dark hair on the headrest that didn't belong to the blonde Sarah Hunter. By Friday evening, Sarah's body was in the morgue. Her car was in the impound. And the town of Manchester was locking its doors for the first time in history. The autopsy would reveal one more secret the next day. A secret Sarah hadn't even written in her diary. She wasn't just leaving town. She was running from a biological reality. Sarah Hunter was 8 weeks pregnant. When the medical examiner released the finding that Sarah Hunter was 8 weeks pregnant, the investigation shifted violently. It was no longer just a whodunit. It was a who's the father? In 1986, DNA testing was in its infancy. It existed, but it wasn't the magic bullet we know today. You couldn't just swab a cheek and get a name. You needed blood types, secretors versus non-secretors. It was clumsy science. But the motive? That was crystal clear. A single woman. A prestigious job is waiting in Florida. A pregnancy that would have complicated everything. Suddenly, every man Sarah knew was a suspect. And in a town like Manchester, that list was dangerous. Suspect number 1. The boyfriend. Or rather, the sort of boyfriend. His name was Billy. A local guy. He owned a landscaping business. He was rough around the edges, the exact opposite of the country club set. Billy and Sarah had been on and off for a year. When police brought him in, he was a wreck. He admitted they had fought the week before. She told me she was leaving, Billy told detectives. She said she was going to Florida and she wasn't coming back. I was angry. Yelled. But I didn't hurt her. Billy had an alibi. He was at a dart league tournament at a local pub called the Mulligan. 12 people swore he was there from 7 p.m. until closing. But there was a gap. Between 6:30 p.m., when Sarah left work, and 7 p.m., when Billy arrived at the bar. 30 minutes. Can you strangle a woman, stage a body, and dump a car in 30 minutes? Police timed it. They drove the route. It was tight. Impossibly tight. Billy was cleared, tentatively. But the cloud over his head never really left. Suspect number 2, the wealthy member. This is where the walls of privilege went up. Rumors had swirled for months that Sarah was seeing a prominent member of the club. Let's call him Mr. Sterling. Sterling was married. He was a power player on Wall Street. He drove a Jaguar. And he was the one who had recommended Sarah for the job in Florida. Was he helping her career? Or was he paying her to go away? If the baby was his, a scandal like that could ruin him. It was the oldest motive in the book. Police went to interview Sterling at his summer estate. They were met by a lawyer before they even reached the front door. Sterling refused to provide a blood sample. He refused to answer questions about his whereabouts on September 18th. His wife provided his alibi. He was home with me all evening reading in the study. It's the classic spousal shield. Without physical evidence tying him to the crime scene, the police were paralyzed. They couldn't force a sample. Sterling sold his house in Manchester the following year and never returned. For decades, the locals whispered that money had bought a get-out-of-jail-free card. The red herrings. Every high-profile murder attracts noise, and the Hunter case was deafening. 2 weeks after the murder, a tip came in about a green van seen parked near the Cornfield. A drifter named Crazy Pete lived in a green van. He was known to shout at women in town. Police tore his van apart. They found golf balls. They found a woman's scarf. The town was ready to lynch him. But the scarf belonged to his mother. The golf balls were range balls he'd scavenged from the woods to sell. And his alibi? He was in police custody in a neighboring town for public intoxication on the night of the murder. It was a dead end. But it wasted 3 precious weeks of investigation. The psychological toll. While the police chased shadows, the town of Manchester began to fracture. Fear is a corrosive thing. Women stopped jogging alone. The golf course, once the jewel of the town, felt haunted. Sarah's parents flew in from California. To see them on the news was heartbreaking. Her father, a stoic man, was holding up her picture. Her mother was begging for someone to speak. She wasn't just a golfer, her mother told a reporter in a trembling voice. She was my daughter. She was going to be a mother herself. Someone stole 2 lives that night. The community felt the weight of the posed body. The shoes. The crossed arms. It felt intimate. It felt like the killer was still there, watching. And in a way he was. There was one piece of evidence that didn't fit any of the main suspects. The footprints near the car. The police had found faint impressions in the mud at the trailhead where the Mazda was dumped. They were size 10. A sneaker. Billy wore work boots, size 11. Mr. Sterling wore size 9 dress shoes. Who wore a size 10 sneaker? The police interviewed over 200 men. They checked shoe sizes. They looked at caddies. They looked at the kitchen staff. They looked at a quiet, awkward 19-year-old kid named David Morrison, who worked part-time mowing the cemetery lawns next to the course. David wore a size 10. Police asked him where he was that night. "I was home watching TV," he said. "Anyone with you?" "No. Just me." He was polite. He was invisible. He didn't have a criminal record. He didn't have a motive. He barely knew Sarah Hunter. Police noted his shoe size, but they had no probable cause to search his home. They moved on. And David Morrison went back to mowing lawns, while Sarah's file began to gather dust. The snow came early that year. By November, the cornfield was buried under a foot of white. The trail where the car was found was impassable. The leads dried up. The task force was dissolved. 1986 turned into 1987. Then 1990. Then 2000. Sarah Hunter became a cold case file number, VSP 86-442. But science was evolving. And in a refrigerated storage locker in Waterbury, Vermont, a tiny, invisible clock was ticking. There is a specific kind of purgatory for cold cases. Sarah Hunter's file sat in a cardboard box for decades. It moved from the Manchester Police Department to the Vermont State Police Barracks, and finally to the Major Crimes Unit archives. Inside that box were the remnants of a life cut short, the autopsy photos, the map of the cornfield, The witness statements were written on yellow legal pads. The receipt for her last lunch. And, sealed in evidence envelopes, the biological samples. Hairs found on the headrest. Swabs from the steering wheel. The fingernail scrapings. And the golf glove. The 90s came and went. DNA profiling became a standard tool, but early testing required large, pristine samples of fluid. The Hunter case didn't have that. There was no semen found on the body. The killer hadn't sexually assaulted her in the traditional sense, or at least, hadn't left that kind of trace. They tested the hair found in the car in 1998. It was inconclusive. Mitochondrial DNA was a match for thousands of people. It was a dead end. Sarah's parents passed away in the early 2000s. They died without knowing who killed their daughter. That is a tragedy that sits heavily on the soul of every detective who touched this case. But technology is patient. By 2018, a new term was buzzing in law enforcement circles: genetic genealogy. We all saw it happen with the Golden State Killer. Suddenly, investigators didn't need a direct match in a criminal database. They could use consumer ancestry websites, the same ones you use to find out if you're Irish or Italian, to build a family tree of a killer. In 2022, the Vermont State Police formed a dedicated cold case unit. Heading the unit was Detective Sergeant Elena Russo. She was tenacious. She had a list of 20 unsolved homicides in Vermont, but Sarah Hunter's was at the top. Because they had the glove. The glove was the key. Think about it. The killer had strangled her. It was intimate. It was violent. It requires grip. It requires effort. When you exert force, you sweat. Even a little. The leather of that glove was a sponge for contact DNA. Detective Russo sent the glove to a private lab in Utah that specialized in touch DNA and a process called MVAC. Imagine a tiny, sterile wet vacuum. It sprays a solution onto the fabric and simultaneously sucks it back up, pulling microscopic cells from deep within the weave of the leather. It's expensive. It's risky. If you mess it up, you destroy the evidence forever. They targeted the inside of the wristband of the glove. Not where Sarah's hand would be, but where someone might have grabbed it to pull it onto her limp hand. Or where someone might have held it while strangling her. 6 months. That's how long Russo waited. In April 2023, the email arrived. The lab had found a mixture of DNA. Profile A, Sarah Hunter. Obviously. Profile B, an unknown male. It was a full profile. Enough for genealogy. Russo didn't celebrate. Not yet. She uploaded the profile to GeneMatch, a database used by law enforcement. She clicked search and watched the screen populate. No direct hits. The killer had never taken a DNA test. But there were cousins. A third cousin in Oregon. A second cousin in Massachusetts. Russo became a historian. She built a family tree going back to the 1800s, then traced it forward to 1986. She was looking for a male. Someone who was in Vermont in the fall of '86. Someone who fits the profile. The tree narrowed down to one family name, the Morrisons. A blue-collar family that had lived in Manchester for 3 generations. There were 3 brothers. Brother 1 was in the army in Germany in 1986. Brother 2 was only 12 years old. Brother 3, David Morrison, born in 1967. In 1986, he was 19. He lived 2 miles from the golf course. He worked as a landscaper at the cemetery adjacent to the 14th hole. And when Russo pulled his old 1986 DMV photo, she saw a lanky kid with dark hair. She pulled the old case file notes. There, on a crumpled index card from the initial canvas. David Morrison, interviewed October 2, '86. Claimed he was home alone. Shoe size 10. Russo felt the chill go down her spine. The shoe size matched. The location matched. The opportunity matched. But David Morrison wasn't in Vermont anymore. In 1987, 6 months after the murder, he had moved to Ohio. He got married. He had kids. He was a grandfather now. He had lived a whole life that Sarah Hunter was denied. Russo booked a flight to Cleveland. She didn't want to just knock on his door. She needed his DNA to confirm. She needed his trash. It was time for a stakeout. May 12, 2023. Cleveland, Ohio. Detective Russo and a team from the local police sat in an unmarked van across from a modest ranch house. David Morrison, now 56 years old, walked out at 7 a.m. He looked normal. Balding, a bit heavy around the middle, wearing a Cleveland Guardians baseball cap. He carried a travel mug. He got into a pickup truck and drove to the high school where he worked as a head custodian. For 2 days, they watched him. He was a ghost in his own life. Quiet. Routine. On the second day, during his lunch break, Morrison sat on a bench outside the school gym. He finished a bottle of Gatorade, crushed the plastic, and tossed it into a public trash can. As soon as he went back inside, Russo moved. She retrieved the bottle. She sealed it. She flew it back to the lab. 24 hours later, the call came. It's a match, Elena. 1 in 400 trillion. David Morrison was the source of the DNA on the golf glove. The warrant was signed within the hour. The interrogation. This is the moment every detective lives for and dreads. They picked him up at his house. Morrison didn't run. He didn't fight. When they told him they were from Vermont, investigating the death of Sarah Hunter, his shoulders dropped. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He just nodded. "I wondered if you'd ever come," he said. In the interview room, the audio recording captures a man who sounds tired. Not evil. Just empty. "Why, David?" Russo asked him. "Why, Sarah?" Twist. We all expected a story of a secret affair. Or a stalker. But the truth was more pathetic and more terrifying. "I used to watch her," Morrison said. "From the cemetery. She was so shiny. She had everything. The car, the clothes, the way people looked at her." Morrison was 19, poor, and invisible to girls like Sarah. "I saw her car that night on Route 7. I flashed my lights. I told her the back tire looked low. Sarah pulled over. She knew him, vaguely. He was the kid who mowed the grass. She wasn't afraid. She got out to look. I tried to. I just wanted to talk to her. I wanted her to know my name. I put my hand on her arm." Sarah flinched. She pulled away. And then she laughed. "It wasn't a mean laugh," Morrison whispered. "It was just dismissive. Like I was a joke. Like I was a child." That laugh was the trigger. The rage of a lifetime of being invisible exploded. He grabbed her. She fought. He grabbed the glove from her pocket, or maybe she had it in her hand, and he wrapped it around her neck. "It happened so fast," he said. And then she was gone. The posing. Russo asked about the cornfield. The shoes. The pose. "I felt bad," Morrison said, his voice cracking. "She looked messy. She hated being messy. I wanted her to look peaceful. Like she was sleeping. I took her shoes off because, I don't know. It felt respectful. Like entering a church." There was a twisted logic. A moment of psychotic tenderness after an act of brutal violence. He drove her car to the trail because he panicked. He walked home through the woods. And then he went to work the next day. And the day after that. He grew up. He moved away. He buried the monster inside him under layers of normalcy. The resolution. In January 2024, David Morrison pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. He will likely die in prison. The news rocked Manchester. People remembered Davy Morrison. The quiet kid. The nice janitor. It forced the town to look in the mirror. The killer wasn't a wealthy outsider or a drifter. He was the boy next door, fueled by a toxic mix of class envy and male entitlement. The impact. Sarah Hunter's name was finally cleared of the scandal and rumors. She wasn't killed because of a sordid affair. She was killed because she existed, bright and ambitious, in the orbit of a man who felt he deserved her light. Today, if you go to the Manchester Country Club, the cornfield is gone. It's a row of luxury condos now. But on the first tee, there is a stone bench. It overlooks the Green Mountains. The plaque reads, "In memory of Sarah Hunter, 1950 to 1986. She played the game with grace." Justice is a strange thing. It doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't undo the 37 years of silence. But it answers the question, can the ghost in the cornfield finally rest? This has been the longest round. Thank you for listening. If you know something about a cold case, don't assume it's too late. Science is catching up. The dead are speaking. And we are finally listening.